For people who are thinking about beginning the process of discussing it with their parents, what would aging gracefully look like to them? And how can you help your parents live as independently as possible for as long as possible? Working with aging parents, it's a joyful process because you want to have them as long as you possibly can, but it is grief-filled too, as well. And navigating the grief and making sure you sprinkle it with as much joy as possible is so important.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of This Day and Age. I'm your host, Phil Tower, and in this episode, we're going to dive headfirst into a reality that's becoming all too familiar for today's children of aging adults, balancing their careers, their families, the growing needs of their aging parents, and helping them to transition to senior care. There's a lot going on. So for many adult children, perhaps you, our listener, this journey is filled with complex decisions, emotions, and unknowns. Our guest on this episode, Diane, faced these same challenges while caring for her aging parents, and she's here in this episode to talk about her personal experience with approaching an important but delicate subject when it comes to your parents navigating this journey, working through some family conversations and discussions, and ultimately making a very important decision that felt right for everyone involved. Diane's story highlights the struggles, the questions, and the realizations along the way that many of us face. Plus, it's a very important reminder that families don't have to face these challenges alone. We're glad to have her with us on this episode to share her journey, offer some wisdom and insights for those of you listening who might be thinking about this or may have just realized, oh my goodness, I have to help my parents navigate these waters and get some guidance along the way. The good news is Diane's got a good story. Welcome to the episode. It's so great to have you here.
Thank you so much for hosting me. I appreciate it.
Well, and you've got a great story. When we invite guests on This Day and Age, we're always looking for good stories, interesting people. So I'm excited to unpack this story. A little bit about yourself first.
Longtime Grand Rapids resident, big proponent for our community and all the exciting things that happen here. Had the opportunity to work with a number of different nonprofit organizations over the years and observed the fact that there were a number of fine, retirement facilities, and sort of had my eye out for the time when we would need something for my parents. But I have, two children who live local, adult children, grandchildren, and had a very exciting career with the Grand Rapids Symphony for a number of years. So it's a wonderful community to live in, and I've enjoyed it very much.
Talk about your relationship with your parents. Were you close with them?
Yes, very close, despite the fact that my late husband and I relocated to Grand Rapids in the early 70s, and my parents continued to live in the southeast Michigan, in Dearborn. So we made that trip back and forth many, many times, and despite the miles, we stayed very close and relied on them for a lot of our social activities and time together. Remained, very close over all the years that we were together.
If you flash back a long time ago, maybe 40 years ago or 35 years ago, did you ever have that conversation with your parents about, hey, Mom and Dad, when you get to a point when you can't live in your house, have you given that some thought?
We actually had given it considerable thought. It's an interesting process that we were part of because my mother's mother lived in a progressive care facility. So think that's many years ago. That was like in the 50s.
Wow.
In the state where they lived, Kansas. And my folks admired the fact that she went through every stage from independent living to skilled care, and were pretty keen on that idea. So as they began to age, it became evident we needed to talk about where would their home be. They were on one side of the state, we were on the other, and what would be the process. And so we had a number of conversations, but there was an idea in their minds of where they wanted to light, which made it a lot easier as time went by to introduce the idea of senior living care for us.
Which is not normally a thing with a lot of people who have lived in one place for many years. It's like, hey, we don't want to go. But your parents were open to that.
They were open to that. I think one of the things that we all face with pretty clear eyes was the fact that we're going to age. Our needs are going to change. And how do we best position ourselves? How do they best position themselves? With one goal in mind, and that was to be as independent as possible for as long as possible. And with that guiding us, sort of our North Star, then what were the decisions that we needed to make along the way? And I should include the fact that I'm representing not just myself, but my siblings. I have a sister and a brother, and we were a pretty good team. Actually, we referred to ourselves more than once as Team G, Team Grandparents. And, so what does Team G want to do? Let's come together and talk this over.
Do you know how rare that is, Diane?
I've heard cases where it's similar, but more cases than not. There are factors within family dynamics that prevent them from having cohesive thinking with their parents and with each other. And we just decided that this was something that we wanted to do to be as supportive of them as possible and work together as a team. So Team G.
Yeah, and a team lightens the load for each individual, which is it's a wonderful thing. So your parents on their own made the decision to move to a senior community here in West Michigan. How and home?
Well, they made two decisions. The first one was, and I know now many people my age, I'm in my early 70s, are making decisions of, do we want to be where our grandchildren are? Do we want to be where our children are if their family members have relocated to different areas? And so there were multiple questions. Physically, geographically, where do we want to be? And then physically, what kind of home do we want to be in? And what is our lifestyle going to be like? And so we talked about those things with them. And they made a decision to move to the west side of the state because, as I said earlier in my comments, we were all pretty big salespeople for West Michigan. And they made a decision that they did not want to live in a single-family home with all of the responsibilities of that. And then what type of community living home would be best for them long-term. And mind you, they were in their late 60s when we were having these conversations. Again, a component of planning, which is it's pretty rare. Some people really push back on planning ahead. What's going to be best for me? And I personally think that a lot of families struggle with the grieving process that goes with changing your lifestyle as you get older. And I think that is an opportunity to be in a community environment where others are facing the same challenges and that same giving up process that you go through.
Yeah, it is a difficult transition for some. I want to go back to Team G, your siblings, and talk about the very early conversations. Everybody has strong opinions, differing opinions, hesitations, concerns. Talk about how you navigated that early on.
My brother and his wife live in California, so they, provided input, traveled back regularly so we could visit about it. Each of us have different skills and talents, and we tried to play to each other's strengths. I think that's the best way to say it. We jokingly say there were times where, as good as my sister and I were at conversations, sometimes we had to call in the boy. You just have to rely on the brother to come in and present the facts and the information a little bit differently than we could. And we were local, so we saw them more often. So on occasion, it was necessary to rely on a different team member. So I think wherever we could, we tried to navigate it by open discussion. And then I can talk about the priorities that we discussed, which were, as my parents made their choices, we needed to talk about the financial situation, the level of independence, security, safety, community, comfort. I mean, where would we find the best balance of all of those factors? Yeah. And we discussed that.
That is really important. I want to pause on that because it's easy to get caught up in the whole emotion of moving mom and dad versus failing to look at the other critical things, like you said, finances, the house, all these components. Mm-hmm. That's very wise. I hope people listening to you say that are taking some notes. It's almost like, did that come naturally for you guys, or did you kind of work as a team, like you said?
We tried to with them, not absent their input, and that's the important part. You sometimes, side conversations, you think that's going well. What do you think? I don't know. Mm-hmm. But most of the time it was letting them take the lead also and saying, these are the things that are important to us. My dad said when he finally closed the door and moved into the Raybrook Estates 2, he felt relieved because didn't have the burden of a home any longer. They knew that there was community that would help them. And so I think for us, we all were trying to include them in all the conversations. So what was their daily life going to look like there? How close would they be to shopping? How close, if they wanted to travel, could they just walk out and close the door and not worry about those things? So taking all those factors into consideration was very important.
Diane, you had an advantage. You and your siblings had an advantage, though, because your parents moved into a continuing care retirement community relatively young. Mm-hmm. They were in their 70s?
Mm-hmm. Yes, which I think was ideal. Again, it was a choice of this or that. Could they have purchased another home when they relocated over here? Yes. Would that have had accompanying responsibilities and duties? Yes. And so when you ask them, what do you want to do with your spare time? How do you want your life to look for however much longer you live? They made the choice that we would like to be able to travel. We want to be able to pursue our interests. We want to be in a place where we feel people are like us. We feel comfortable. And so they made a decision not to purchase a home and then began to look around for different facilities. And at that time, I got involved with them and said, you could look at Holland Home was the one that I mentioned first. And then there are a couple of others. They all provide fine services. They have good reputation. I'll go with you if you would like me to. But they chose to visit others and made their own decision that the services and the opportunities provided here suited them best.
And that continuum of care component was really important for them. Can you talk about that?
I think that, again, they were pretty realistic that even though in their 70s they were in really good health, they knew things would change. I mean, you watch anyone's situation change over time, and they decided that they wanted to be in an environment where there were interventions as their level of independence changed. They were able to drive. They were able to go shopping. They were able to be completely independent when they first moved into Raybrook and never felt encumbered like this is a place where we can't do what we want to do. Anything that they wanted to do in their life, they were able to do. And there was a chapel right downstairs. They could attend church. The other point that I want to make there is from a family point of view, that phrase, how are you really? Mm-hmm. I felt like the staff kept everyone, not just my parents, but all of the residents at every different level in their minds and asked questions that led residents to answer in a way that it was important to my siblings and me that if there were red flags that we didn't see in our visits, that somebody else did and we were contacted or they would convey, my parents would convey to us. I talked to so-and-so. They were really helpful. They suggested this. They prepared that. Mm-hmm. And to go back to your comment about moving in at a younger age than many, most of the decisions were made when they were really, clear-eyed and in great health. And they became immersed in all that this community offers. And that probably would have been true in other environments, but this was ideal. It allowed this to be their home. And that's really what we were looking for.
And I think so many people, I want to go back to what you said about your dad when he moved into Raybrook. They forget there's this sense of relief. I don't have to do all these things that I had to do. that felt like a ball and chain, and also is difficult emotionally because you're losing the stamina, the ability to mow the lawn, fertilize the lawn, clean out the gutters, all the responsibilities that come with home ownerships. And that is so important.
If I could interject,
Sure.
I think the important thing for all families and potential residents of any facility to look at is, what would I do if I weren't here? Because it's so easy to look at it like, well, I'm going there and I'm giving all of this up. But it's important to envision your life. If I didn't have this, what would I be? What would my life be like? And look at the comparison as clear-eyed as possible. And I think in their case, to your point, maintenance costs. The costs would have been much greater. It's a very good decision to look at the way the finances play out in a continuing care facility versus home ownership and all the responsibilities that go with that. And as adult children, would I rather come over and visit in a lovely living room and have a cup of tea in the afternoon, or would I rather be cleaning their gutters? And that's a reality that adult children need to face, not to force their parents to make choices that are difficult, but look at the many pluses that accompany community living. If they're not, if they're accustomed to a single-family home, if they lived in an apartment, maybe it's a little easier in a more urban area or something.
Diane, you talked about the process of working with your parents to make these decisions about continuing care. I'd like to ask you to help us understand the process you went through for understanding the differences between home care, assisted living, dementia care, and then ultimately palliative and or hospice care. Can you just discuss navigating that journey, if you would, please?
Yeah. My sister-in-law, Glenda, is a nurse, and so at times she would help describe some of those different levels. But upon enrolling in the process and being here, we learned quickly what are the different levels. And because my folks moved in at such a young age, they observed how it worked for others, and in some cases, they were teaching us. Well, this is when, dementia care kicks in, or this is when assisted living kicks in. So they were well aware of the process, but in our case, you turn to staff, and they were always available. As my parents aged, as health issues changed, there was always a staff person to participate in something. And I will digress, if I may, right here. My mother developed pancreatic cancer in her late 80s, and we investigated surgical, different oncological interventions. And I discussed with my siblings and my parents, I said, the other choice is to be realistic about this. It's not a good disease. Let's just talk to hospice. Honestly, doesn't John Mulder, who at that time was running Faith Hospice, come to their apartment? We sit around the dining room table and we have an extensive conversation about Faith Hospice and what does this mean and what does hospice care look like. That could not have been more helpful. We would have never been able to navigate the decisions absent that kind of intimate discussion about end-of-life choices. I mean, I can't put a high enough value on that intervention. And when it was time to move from 100% independent living to assisted living and then skilled nursing, the professional staff explained the options, explained the process, and set up a schedule, calendared it so that we knew exactly what to expect. They knew exactly what to expect, and everything was fulfilled. So there was professional staff at every turn to inform and educate and hold our hands and wipe our eyes. I mean, it's not a decision process that isn't laced with emotion.
You're sharing this story so calmly and clearly, but yet there were difficult points along the way. And I want to go back to what you were saying about your parents being acutely aware that life would happen to them, that changes would happen, that they would lose abilities to be as mobile as they wanted to be, driving, health issues. They were aware of that. What a blessing. What an incredible blessing that was for you and your siblings, but to be smart and then to rely on the experts available to them. Dr. John Mulder, rock star in terms of
100%.
expert, to have that ability to have a conversation
at the dining room table.
It's just unreal.
Yeah, it wasn't a cold,
It's so wonderful.
office someplace, and it changed everything. And my mother lived 18 months comfortably with hospice support, and moved to skilled nursing when possible or when necessary, and lived out her life very comfortably. And I have to say, the hands-on staff, as both of their health, because I can talk about my father as well, as their health deteriorated and skilled nursing care was needed, the hands-on staff are so supportive and of both the family members and the person, the patient. And they shift from being an independent, vibrant individual to the point where they're a patient in essence, a hospital bed.
And you were a bit of a caregiver in this role as well, too, along with your siblings?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my sister, it was ideal. My sister retired after, and would often take my dad to different medical appointments, and we would go and visit my mom as often as possible. And so we were all involved. And every time you came here, you learned something new that was important for being able to be a good, supportive adult child, family member.
Can we talk a little bit about the emotion?
Well, I hope.
Especially for you, when you're seeing these changes happen, you'd plan for it, but it's still difficult. What was that like, especially when you hear mom or dad say, I've got pancreatic cancer?
Mm-hmm. It's very emotional, and it's heart-wrenching. Again, if they were in their home alone because they hadn't chosen to be in an environment where there were many hands and many hearts caring about them, it would have been a different situation for us.
Yeah.
But it was extremely emotional. And the care that Mom received from the hospice staff in assisted living was fabulous. Then my father, after many years, 15, 16 years of living independently, he went through a very gradual aging process. And unfortunately, the pandemic hit. And that was when we were, discouraged. They would have allowed us to come and see him, but you were discouraged in the early days of the pandemic. So for 7 months, they would hold the iPad, and, he'd cry, we'd cry on the phone. And it was heart-wrenching to not be able to come and visit, but the staff did so many things to allow us to still interact with him and be a part of his life. But and I have to commend them greatly for that. And it took time. It took away from other things to be able to hold the phone so we could FaceTime or the iPad.
Were there any, obviously COVID had to have been one of them, that frustration of separation for such a long period of time. Were there any other painful moments or obstacles you encountered along the way?
Very few. Just the normal. I mean, I think that was, what is the normal aging process? And giving up your parents to aging is painful because you see them change, just like it's inevitable, but you don't desire it. And so there were many times where watching them go from, being able to prepare a meal to relying on us to drop off dinner or providing their own, those were steps that were heart-wrenching and emotional, yeah. But again, I think in their case, the faith-based staff here was constantly reinforcing their ability to cope and our ability to cope. So, but yeah, there's a lot of grief laced into the process of watching your parents age.
Yeah. Diane, and you and your siblings had children as well. You have children, but you're caring for aging parents. This is that whole concept of the sandwich generation. You've got struggles and stresses and concerns, and your heart's being pulled in two directions. Can you talk about that?
Unfortunately, the Lord only gave us 24 hours in a day. We all need 28, but
it's the understatement of this conversation.
But we managed to squeeze it all in. Again,
Yeah.
My sister's local, I'm local, so we tried to trade off responsibilities and come over when we could. She did a lot of day driving after she retired, and we got over to visit as often as we could, and we made a point of the kids, our adult children, understanding that the G's were still part of our lives. And I have to say, the dining room in Raybrook was once a month, I think, creates a family dinner atmosphere. And so they were still able to host us while they were in independent living. And we made a point of bringing the kids, calendaring time when we would all be together at my house or here for dinner, where the kids interacted. So we tried to make sure the kids stayed involved as much as they could. A lot of games of hand and foot and Scrabble at the dining room table were things that we tried to accomplish, but it was hard to calendar time in our kids' lives to be part of their grandparents' life. And it was hard for us to just juggle the duties and responsibilities of working when your time with your family really only starts at 5:30 or 6 o'clock at night, and you got to get over and say hi. And luckily, FaceTime became more available, and during our era than it has been in the past, and that made it a lot easier. FaceTime, iPads, just phone conversations.
Yeah.
A quick call can make all the difference, and you can hear a lot in a phone conversation about how their day went. Did the Tigers win? Oh no, the market's going to down when it shouldn't be going down.
Yeah.
I mean, the things that were important to them. So
And along the way, feeling less stressed because you had those experts at Raybrook, nurses, medical experts, eventually hospice. I mean, that had to be a huge relief. And you navigated that with their assistance. Were your parents involved in some of these decisions, obviously?
Very much so. They, at no point, except toward the very end of my father's life during the beginning of the pandemic, were they in a position where they were not participating in the decisions and concurrent with them, agreeing with them. And toward the end, when you have to make some choices about how will any more medical interventions make a difference, those are hard. And that was, where hospice steps in and helps you understand that there are things that could be done, but will it really alter the outcome, and will it change the lifestyle, the quality of life that your parents are experiencing? And that was important, to have professional help in navigating some of the health-related decisions.
And you used the word superb in talking about Faith Hospice and your mom's situation. And she passed before your dad. So there's grief, that component.
And just shortly before that, my husband had passed away unexpectedly. And so we navigated the loss of their experiencing grief around losing Michael. And so it was a couple of years there were a little rugged. But, we try to talk about our feelings, and it's easier. I think as time goes by, people are more inclined to talk about their feelings. They were part of the greatest generation, and that wasn't always what people in that era are encouraged to do.
I'm so glad you said that, because you had a support team there for you. Your siblings, too?
Absolutely. Yeah, they were, Faith Hospice as well. Yeah. And yes, many, many supportive people. But I think that's where my references to grief come in, because it alerts you, the loss of anyone in your life alerts you to the fact that some of these feelings I'm feeling are really grief-related, and they need to be addressed as part of the giving up process.
This is such a powerful story. How do you think, going to be a little introspective, how do you think this has changed you? You look in the rearview mirror at Diane 5 years ago or 10 years ago.
Well, I think it changed me in that it provided me with positive memories versus memories that were laced with, consternation, disagreement, feeling helpless. I don't think I ever once felt helpless. They give the resources that are constantly available to you at every level, and were there to answer my questions. And so I felt less helpless, and it empowered me to make, to guide my own decisions and confer with my siblings on what did we all agree on were the right next steps, and my parents, as long as they were sufficiently capable of doing that. I think the other thing it made me happy about was there was expected value in long-term community care living for my parents, and then there were many unexpected values. And I think the unexpected value, like the dinners that I referenced, the access for my mom to the library. She loved to read. And they said, well, would you like to be on the library committee? So they never sat in their rooms with nothing to do. And I think that inspires me to, as an adult now facing, some of the same issues will loom in my future. How did they do it well? And what will I do the same? And what will I do differently? Yeah. What is important to me, just like they had to decide what was important to them and find a setting in which they could live out those goals.
You used the word empowerment, which I love that word because you were empowered. You and your family were empowered in this process because you had the knowledge about this process through the experts in this journey. Mm-hmm. It was really important.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was the knowledge was the tools for making decisions that we felt comfortable with. Not to use the term right or wrong, it's just the set of decisions that worked best for all of us.
As we close this conversation, we have listeners hearing this conversation as a podcast, and they're probably entering this journey or thinking about this journey. What words would you share with them, especially if they're just on the doorstep of this?
In addition to our Guide Star, which was allowing our parents to live independently as long as possible, the other phrase that we often said was, we want them to age gracefully. And I think that was guiding us as well. And I would say for people who are thinking about beginning the process of discussing it with their parents, what would aging gracefully look like to them? And how can you help your parents live as independently as possible for as long as possible? Whatever those criteria are in their family, those would be some of the things that are most important.
I love that, aging gracefully. Were there some specific resources you would recommend? Because a lot of times you get analysis paralysis in this process.
Yeah.
Any words of wisdom on that?
I just listen to the professionals. They work with so many people that they can give you information. Whether you accept it letter and verse or not is your choice. But I would say listen to the medical community, the social workers, the folks that are in, helping your parents in their hospital bed when they're in skilled nursing. Listen and be very astute about what works.
And when you needed to have that conversation with them, they were there.
They were there. Yeah. They were there, and took time. No hesitation. And positivity, and these are good things we see. Constantly saying we saw these successes, we saw this. Never Pollyanna, always realistic. But gave you the information and the knowledge that you needed to make good decisions. I'd say listening.
That's good encouragement.
Your siblings.
It's good encouragement.
Do your best to become a Team G.
Yeah. Well, you read my mind. I was going to say, and don't forget to lean on your siblings.
Lean on your siblings.
It's very natural. I can tell you probably have the strength to do this on your own, but you did maybe that was just a false impression. You did. You got me very well on that one, Diane. You did have a great team, that Team G, and I think that's some other good wisdom for our listeners to remember. Lean on your family members, even if it's hard, even if it's messy. Lean on them, right?
Yeah. And alignment is really important, because you know, if one child walks in and says, we're going to do this, this, and this, the other child goes in and goes, well, you think we should do that? You don't want to plant seeds of doubt.
Yeah.
You know, making a decision and then affirming it in their minds and supporting the steps as you move through the steps. But you cannot deny the fact that working with aging parents it's a joyful process, because you want to have them as long as you possibly can, but it is grief-filled too, as well. And navigating the grief and making sure you sprinkle it with as much joy as possible is so important.
Great words of wisdom from you. Thank you so much. This has been a wonderful story. I've enjoyed it. I know our listeners have enjoyed it. Thank you, Diane.
It's been my pleasure. I hope that it's helped.
I have no doubt. I want to thank our guest, Diane Lobbestaal, for sharing her personal story and, more importantly, helping you and I understand the realities, the emotions, everything that comes along the way with navigating senior care decisions. It's not easy, but it's important, and it's one that we will all face. Lots of questions, lots of challenges, and many tough conversations. Don't forget the Team G concept. You don't have to face this alone. So, if you or your family are beginning this journey, maybe you're feeling a little overwhelmed, unsure where to go with all the options. We talked about analysis paralysis, a lot of decisions that lie ahead. Remember the wonderful expert resources and support systems designed to help Christian Living Services and its network, Highland Home, Faith Hospice, Atria Home Care, many of these that Diane talked about. They're all here. They're all standing ready to give you guidance, compassion, expertise. Remember, we talked about that a lot in this conversation. Expertise every step of the way, all here. Take advantage of that. And as always, thank you for tuning in. I hope you've enjoyed Diane's story as much as I have, and this episode of This Day and Age. We hope it brought you a little more clarity and encouragement and maybe some joy down the road. Until next time, for This Day and Age, I'm Phil Tower. Take care, and thank you for listening.